You and I have been dating for 6 months. 6 months to the day, in fact, though you think I've forgotten that. You're at work, a little bit grumpy, because I told you I was busy tonight. And suddenly I show up at your desk in the middle of the day. Let's go, I say. And surprisingly, your boss says, go ahead, it's all been arranged. Where we go is to the airport. And it's only when you board the plane that you find out we're heading to New Orleans. I won't say much about our travel plans, but maintain a kind of cryptic smile throughout. We check into an expensive hotel, head down to the French Quarter, are seated at a table in a fancy restaurant. Romantic music is playing at my cue. I get up from my chair, I go down on one knee and say that I have something I want to ask you. Do I have your attention? Or imagine that I'm your father. Tomorrow we'll be driving to drop you off for your freshman year of college. You're packing up clothes and linens and books when I ask if you could take a break. Sure, you say. We get into the car. We drive out of town about 10-15 minutes to one of our favorite spots. We get out of the car. We start climbing a hill overlooking the river. You glance at me, puffing my way up the hill, and see that my eyes are glistening. Are those tears? We arrive at the top. We sit down side by side on the old Lookout Rock. The river valley is spread out before us. We share a moment of silence, drinking in the beauty. I turn to you and say, I've been thinking for 2 years about what I want to say to you today. Do I have your attention? Or imagine that I'm your elderly mother. I've been out of the old family house for years, made the transition to an apartment very well. I've always been a cheerful sort, seemingly indestructible. You've come over for coffee, and after some small talk, I ask if we could go for a little trip. Could you take me by the old house, our old neighborhood? We park out by the house, walk across the street. You take me by the arm as we stroll through the park. It's a beautiful fall day, a feast for the senses, with the sight of leaves ablaze, the sound of children's voices playing nearby. We sit together on a park bench. A sudden gust of wind sends leaves swirling around our ankles. I frown as I turn to you and tell you that I saw the doctor last week to go over some test results. I have some news I need to share. Do I have your attention? There are moments in life that we know are important. We can feel it in our gut, in the pit of our stomach, with a lump in our throat, a tear in our eye. At those moments, we really listen. We really pay attention. The Bible says that God speaks to us. Those who wrote and edited the Scriptures tell many of the stories as if God spoke to us directly. But my experience has been that the voice of God comes indirectly through the voices of others, especially at those moments when I'm really paying attention. That's when I can hear God's voice right alongside the voice of my mother or my father, my friend or partner, child or neighbor, even a teacher or a preacher. But of course, you have to pay attention. One last scenario to imagine. You and I have been through hell together in the past few months and years. We've worked side by side for hours and hours without end making bricks. We were whipped. We were beaten to make sure that every last ounce of productivity was squeezed out of us. We were slaves, treated like dirt. Then came this Moses, who through his brother Aaron told us that we could be free. And after a series of incredible events, Pharaoh let us go. It was God's doing, Moses told us, whoever this God is. Pharaoh let us go, but then he relented. He sent an army after us, sharp steel and armored horses and chariots of war against ordinary and exhausted flesh and blood. But God saved us. That's what Moses told us. By drowning the Egyptian soldiers and horses. God saved us by giving us bread and water in the wilderness. God saved us by delivering us from Egypt in order to become God's people. And now we've been brought to the foot of a mountain. Sinai, they call it. And last night it was like close encounters of the third kind, lightning and thunder and fire and smoke, as a huge and holy presence descended upon the mountain. We've never seen anything like it. And here comes Moses, his hair turned white, his face shining bright red, like the permanent reflection of a blazing bonfire, carrying 2 large tablets of stone. God has spoken, Moses says, and this is what God has said. Does God have our attention? It was at that heart-stopping, jaw-dropping, awe-inspiring moment that the Ten Commandments was originally delivered, the way of God revealed. That's how the book of Exodus tells the story. And if those freed and former slaves were paying attention, they found out something amazing, that God's way is all-encompassing, involving not just our worship, but our work life as well. Don't work 7 days a week, but observe a Sabbath. It involves us in the public sphere. Don't lie in a court proceeding. It involves us in the private sphere. Look after your parents. It involves our sex life. Be faithful to your mate. And our inmost thoughts. Do not lust at somebody else's new car or huge house or trophy husband. The Ten Commandments told them that God was to be found and heard and received as a loving guide everywhere, throughout their lives. It truly was a user's guide issued by the creator of the universe. But now in Deuteronomy, in the reading that Chris just shared, years have passed since that Sinai event. As those Hebrews face a new transition, a new life situation into this promised land, the story of the commandments in Deuteronomy is told again. And the way it's told emphasizes that it's still relevant and contemporary even to this new situation. Not with our ancestors did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are all of us here, alive today. That's a remarkable verse in the passage. Pay attention. The author of Deuteronomy seems to be telling them, it may be an old story, but it's about you right now. Another layer. Years and years later, the nation of Israel is foundering, and King Josiah wonders why. An old scroll turns up that hasn't been read for years, hasn't been followed. The scroll is Deuteronomy. It's the way. It's read publicly, and Josiah calls for the nation to repent, and things start to go better once again. One more layer. Scholars tell us that these stories were probably not written down until after the exile. Years and years later, after the nation of Israel had been conquered, broken, shattered, the people scattered to the corners of the known world. And when the exile ended, when the people were called to return to Israel and become a people again, the story is told once more to remind them of their genesis as a people, the exodus that freed them, and the covenant of the commandments that defined them. Pay attention. The old story is new once more. And now us, and now here, and now today, the same message. If we pay attention, if we truly pay attention to those around us, to the world around us, we will still hear God's voice calling us to the way that the Ten Commandments revealed. The way of love that Jesus told us is the real purpose lying behind the commandments. You know what that way is, a life of worship, of faithfulness, of neighborliness, of peace, of joy, a way of love. That old message, it seeks to live in us again and anew. Perhaps the only thing that could prevent that from happening is if we don't pay attention. Will we do it? Will we give God our attention? Many of you probably have the same memories that I have. Saturday night, we would peel the potatoes for Sunday lunch. Mom would spice the roast. She'd put it in a pan and put it in the fridge. We often made the dessert Saturday evening, even set up the dinner table the night before. Sunday morning, Mom would pop the roast into the oven. We would get dressed in our best clothes. We would go to church. When we came home, we would all sit around the dinner table, still dressed up. We'd be served a wonderful meal, the oldest served first and the youngest last. The dinner would often last for 2 hours or more as we talked and laughed and argued and cried and apologized and laughed once more. After dinner, we would change our clothes and play together in our yard, sometimes with friends, sometimes with just our family. Sunday evening, we would set out the bowls of leftovers from the week prior and have an informal meal as we played a game or watched TV as a family. This was Sunday. It wasn't Saturday. It wasn't Friday. It couldn't be mistaken for any other day of the week. It was special. It was Sunday. It was Sabbath. And everything we did helped us pay attention to that fact. Did you ever wonder where the idea of the weekend comes from? The notion of measuring time by weeks? It wasn't found in the other ancient cultures that surrounded Israel. Every culture had the notion of a day. A day represents the time it takes for the earth to rotate on its axis, from sunrise to sunset to sunrise once more. And every culture had the notion of a month. A month represents the cycle of the moon, from dark to full to dark once more. And just about everyone had the notion of a year. A year is the length of the earth's journey around the sun and the procession of the seasons. But what is a week? A week is an invention, something that sets us apart from the normal processes of time. In our faith tradition, we believe that the notion of a week, 6 days of work followed by 1 day of Sabbath, was invented by God and given to us. Do you still pay attention to Sabbath in your family, in your life, in our culture? I wonder. I wonder where Sabbath has gone to in our culture. The stores are all open on Sundays now. God knows the bars are all open. More and more people, therefore, have to work on Sundays. How many of our youth are not here this morning because they have work that they're doing today? Overstressed parents often use Sunday to frantically perform household chores or catch up on their honey-do lists. Families are just as likely nowadays to fly apart as stay together on Sundays. There's work and soccer and friends and malls and movies and dates, and the list goes on and on. It goes without saying there are many, many families that don't make church a regular part of their Sabbath observance. What happened to Sabbath? I know I'm starting to sound like a crank this morning, one of those, what happened to you young people in your fancy new ways? But I'm in good company. In the Bible, the importance of Sabbath is central. We are told that there are 3 reasons why Sabbath is so special and so central. First, it's a reminder that God frees us from slavery. God freed us from slavery in Egypt, and God frees us from slavery to our jobs today. In ancient days, slavery was a matter of who owns your body. Today, the issue is who owns your time. I know you have many claims on your time, but Sabbath gives us the opportunity once a week, 1 day a week, to claim a day for ourselves and to feel free. The second reason given in the Bible for the Sabbath is a more subtle one. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th according to the story, and we too are told to work for 6 days and rest on the 7th. And one of the phrases used in biblical Hebrew to describe God resting on that first Sabbath means he got his soul back. On the seventh day, God gets God's soul back. We are reminded to rest on the seventh to get our souls back. The third reason we're told to stop on the seventh day and have Sabbath is so that we can take a day to detach ourselves from all of our problems, from everything unfinished and unpleasant in our lives. On this day, we take Jesus at his word when he tells us, do not be anxious about your life. They will all be waiting for us at Sabbath's end, the unpaid bills, the family conflicts, the problems at work, the unfulfilled self-improvement goals. But for one day, we will have had the liberating experience of not worrying about them. Rabbi Harold Kushner, traveling through Europe, noted the many beautiful Christian sanctuaries he found there. How many of you have gone cathedral gaping in Europe? Christians, he writes, create beautiful sanctuaries. Then he noted that he could find almost no beautiful Jewish temples. The reason? Well, Kushner writes, while Christians build their sanctuaries in space, through the Sabbath, Jews build their sanctuaries in time. Can you take the time to be holy? To celebrate the freedom that God has given you? To get your soul back? To set aside the worries of your life? You don't have to do it the way that we did it way back when. But how will you do it? How will you pay attention? It's important, this part of the way that is the Sabbath. It's worth paying attention to. And that's only one of the 10 commandments, just a part of the larger way that asks us to pay attention throughout our lives, throughout all the time that we spend. Mark Nepo writes, our challenge each day is to unglove ourselves so that the doorknob feels cold and the car handle feels wet and the kiss goodbye feels like the lips of another being, soft and unrepeatable. When the glove comes off, spiritually speaking, we allow God to speak to each of our everyday encounters. Touch us in the touch of every hand that we grasp. Move us in all that we do to show and share loving kindness, no matter how small or seemingly inconsequential. When we give life our attention, we offer God the opportunity to speak, to touch, and to move us. So, as you go about this week, surrounded by the beauty of fall, engaged in conversation with family, friends, and strangers, as you spend your days this week at work and play, labor and leisure, striving and Sabbath, as you hear the voices of others, I pray you will also hear the voice of one other, the voice of God, whispering under the words, smiling like the sun, causing you to pause amid your busyness and asking you a simple question. Do I have your attention?